School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with the recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board YouTube channel. All would like to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we'll have a brief moment of silent meditation. Mrs. Swigert, roll call.
Yes. Mr. Bradley.
Here.
Mr. Frenchel.
Here.
Mrs. Huff.
Here.
Mr. Kickline.
Here.
Dr. Lebo. Miss Morgan. Dr. Rhodes. Mr. Sanker.
Here.
And Mr. Rupp.
Here. Endorsement of agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda for tonight's special meeting?
There are no changes and it will stand as is.
Thank you. Item 2, hearing of visitors of items on the meeting agenda. There will be 2 opportunities for public comment this evening. As a reminder, public comment is limited to residents and taxpayers of the school district. At this time, we have reached the first opportunity for public comment. This opportunity is reserved for comments related to items that are listed on the agenda, are listed on the evening's agenda for a vote. The second opportunity for public comment will occur at the end of the meeting. The second opportunity for public comment is reserved for comments on issues not listed on the agenda and not being voted upon. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual and requires community members to observe a reasonable decorum. If you'd like to address the board, please come up to the podium and share your name and the municipality in which you reside. This is for any public comment on items on the agenda that are being voted upon at tonight's special meeting. Seeing none, move on to item 3, new business, personnel, item 3.01, Mr. Bradley.
I'd ask the board to approve 2 related memoranda of understandings with the Mechanicsburg Education Association.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any further discussion?
I'd like to note that I'm very appreciative of the work that has gone into these memorandums of understanding. I think that it is unfortunate that overall we needed memorandums of understanding at all on what constitutes courses and courses for reimbursement and things that are listed in the documents there. I find that when we think about the academic standards we hold our students to and the tradition, pride, and excellence part that the flags we have right outside this building, I think that it's difficult to square that with some of the things that brought us to this memorandum of understanding. And so I'll be joining you all in voting yes for this, likely, but I think it's not something I wanted to vote yes on. I think this is a frustrating, I don't know, I think I'm frustrated by the fact that this is where we had gotten to with the union in terms of what, having to come up with a memorandum. Here we are. So, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Sager. Any other discussion, comments? Seeing none, Mrs. Swigert.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Move on to item 4, hearing of visitors. We have reached the second opportunity for public comment. This opportunity is reserved for comments on issues not listed on the agenda and not being voted upon this evening. As a reminder, public comment is limited to residents and taxpayers of the school district. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual and requires community members to observe a reasonable decorum. If you'd like to address the board, please share your name and municipality in which you reside. This is items that were not on the agenda and not voted on tonight at the special meeting. Seeing none, item 5, Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
I have something before we adjourn. Tonight is the current board. It's the last night for the current board. take a moment to thank those that are on the board today that will be wrapping up after tonight. Dr. Rhodes, who was instrumental to helping us during COVID and was a good asset to have, helping Dr. Leidy and helping the board navigate the many things that we had to do as far as COVID was concerned and his years representing the board. Mr. Sanker, for your willingness to step in as the vice president, and then the phenomenal work that you did with the CTC and taking on additional responsibilities at the CTC. That helped us remember that we're more than just preparing kids for college. We're also preparing students for life, whatever that path and whatever that choice in life is going to be. And working closely with the CTC and all the great stuff that you did and the willingness to take on the board role on that, as well as the board role responsibilities here, were a great asset to us. Thank you for that. And then Mr. Rupp for joining me 18 years ago and taking on responsibilities as a board member, as a vice president, and then ultimately as the president of the board, and your willingness to negotiate, to discuss, to help the board navigate the many issues that we had over the years. We've been fortunate that they have been few, but your leadership has been very, very much appreciative. And I've always reminded of what previous superintendent, Dr. Leidy's favorite expression was. We always have to remember that what we're doing for the kids. And the three of you, with your years of service and your dedication and the work that you've done, always helped us remember to keep that in the forefront. And for that, we thank you for all that you guys have done for the board and for the Mechanicsburg community, students, and faculty over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Ms. Morgan. Meeting is adjourned.
Oh, I thought you were right.
No, not with the screen. Anybody needs to take a quick 4-minute break?
4 minutes.
Next meeting.
Right.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November 25th, 2025 work session. I'd like to announce that the meeting of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. On to item 2, district recognitions. Item 2.01, marching band recognition. Vince.
Always excited to recognize some outstanding students and groups in our district, and tonight we're able to recognize our marching band. So if you guys want to come forward a while, they had an outstanding season, and I won't steal their thunder, but we're so excited to be able to recognize just a few of the more than 100 students who are participants in this program, which has been a huge part of our district for a long time. And we'll turn it over to Mr. Ben Goldsboro, our director, and Mrs. Alice Broadway, our assistant.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having us, guys. Getting over a thing, so this is the voice you get tonight. Yeah, as you guys see on the picture there, we were just reminiscing now because now this was 3 weeks ago, November 1st. This team, your Mechanicsburg Marching Band, performed the Pennsylvania State Championships. This is Group 5 Open, so we saw our competition was the largest and the most competitive bands in the state. As you may be aware, they took home the state championship. They were awarded best visual. You guys make sure I get this right. Best visual, best music, best overall effect, and best percussion. Yeah, we got them all. So, so just a very, very cool moment. Kind of a mountaintop experience for our kids. And as I told them at their banquet a few weeks ago, not an accident. This is something, if you guys know, if you've been a part of things like this, this has been months in the making, years in the making, really, to see the growth of the program and the effort of the students and all the very many hands that lift up this program. It's one of the reasons why I chose to leave the program that I built at Cedar Cliff and come here 15 years ago, because there are so many people that are invested in what we do with marching band here and what the kids get out of it. So mountaintop experience. A lot of us left it. You know, we get on Slack afterwards and we're just expressing gratitude, and that's really what I wanted to do tonight, is just to thank you guys for your role. We have so many adults that support what we do, including the folks in this room, our superintendent, our building administrators. They see the value in it, and I feel grateful for that. We have many hands making the work happen. And our mission is really clear, and it always has been, to build a community. There's 138 kids in that team. And we're very proud that we are an activity, even though we're competitive and we're going for it and we're working hard. We're an activity that does not have a bench. We do not have a second string. We do not have a junior varsity team. So if you come out for marching band, you are on that field performing a critical role, and everyone's counting on you to do it, which absolutely creates both a challenge, because it's a lot of humans, and that many humans in one space can get really messy, but a beautiful opportunity for community building, a wonderful opportunity to seek excellence. I really love what this does for our kids, because what those 138 kids did was uncommonly excellent. It's pretty rare to see something at that level. I think you guys have a link to the video if you want to check it out. You can see kind of the handy cam version of what they did that night. But that is a blueprint. What they did is a blueprint that they can apply in their entire lives. You know, like, how did I create some magic? How did I create something beautiful? How did I do it? I did it through hard work. I did it through going to the parking lot on days I didn't want to go, working next to people that maybe I didn't like that day. And despite all of that, pushing through that and creating something together that was really remarkable. I point that wisdom to them pretty often, and it's honestly, it's why I do it. I love the journey that our kids take and the growth that we see. So I'm going to shut up because I can talk about marching band all night. We have wonderful kids here. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce you. These are representatives from our student leadership team. Okay, these are the brave ones that came out on Thanksgiving break. So we have 3 wonderful students here. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves, what instrument you play, and how many years you've been on the team. Okay, those are all pretty standard. And then maybe we'll just do like the general, like what has your experience meant to you? You could talk about state championships, or you could talk about marching band in general. And then if you guys want to hit them up with anything while you got them, open season. Sound good? So, Elena, go ahead.
My name is Elena Morehouse. I have played cello for 2 years and trumpet for my first 2 years. So I've been in marching band for 4 years. Marching band has just really given me a place to come back to over and over. It has been a way to make friends, to have a place to go on Saturdays where I might not have been able to plan something to hang out with people. It's been a great place to grow thanks to the incredible staff that we have. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without it.
My name is William Kaufman. I've been in the program for 5 years, so I started up in 8th grade. I play the baritone, which is a low brass instrument, and marching band for me pretty much has taught me a lot of skills, whether it's communicating and talking with people, because I was terrible at that in 8th grade, to learning time management skills, being long practice days and all that, and then to even learning how to manage and coordinate a team of 18 members in my section, but also something bigger, which like coning off the parking lot and making sure things like that are managed.
My name is Ian Brookmeyer. I played the saxophone, and I've been in the band for 5 years now. And marching band to me is something really special because I've, over the last couple of years, have had the opportunity to play in a lot of super high-level ensembles outside the school. And that has never shoved me away from coming back to marching band because I know that my contribution is just as equal as everybody else's. And that's something that you don't get in a lot of places where not only do you have to perform at your highest level, but you need to cause other people to perform at their highest level. And that comes through, like what Mr. G was talking about, the community building aspect of it, and just the fact that everybody understands that even on their worst day, they need to do it not just for themselves, but for other people around them. And that's kind of what this activity provides, is this selflessness over a course of time.
Well, I'm a band mom. I had 2 kids being in marching band. So 6 years I was a marching band mom, and I salute you guys for the dedication because there's no other sport team that puts as much time as you guys did, starting with your 2 weeks at summer camp. I don't know if you still Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays, then you have to go off to competition. So there's not another sport here that puts in the amount of time and work and dedication that you guys do. And I'm very, very proud of you because I know the hours that you've put in and the dedication, and everything that you all have said is so true. Working with 137 other people with you, and being at the top, everybody has to be at the top notch, and to win what you did is phenomenal. I'm very, very proud of you. And it will stick with you for the rest of life. My kids have been out 15, 13 years, and to this day, they'll still say marching band was the best experience they had through high school. And it still means a lot to them, and they still talk about it. So you guys will remember this forever, that you've accomplished it.
I can't count how many times I drove past the parking lot and saw you guys. Was it the butterfly transformation that was the winning show?
Yes.
That was
Butterfly
amazing.
effect.
That was amazing. Thank you.
That's very good.
I went to my wife, I said, this is just incredible. It was like, it was all over the field. It had electric guitars, it had things shaped, it was just incredible. It took so much work to do that.
So D on the midfield was for Donegal? Or where were we?
Downingtown.
Downingtown.
Yes.
Okay, so we were debating where the D was because you could see the D right in as you were marching around, but we weren't sure where the D was. So that was great. During the football season, I had opportunity to bring a couple of friends to football games. One, a brother-in-law who played marching band years and years ago, and another friend whose kids went to Trinity. And both of them were completely blown away by the program at halftime that was put on, and the coordination and the effort and the work that you obviously could see. So I was proud to kind of just, yep, that's our band. That's my band. I was like, that's my band. And then the other thing that was really something, and I caught it a couple of different times during the tape, the YouTube, was you could see the people in the stands had, the parents had butterflies, and you could see the butterflies popping up every so often on the recording, and it was phenomenal. Now you were the feature sax player, correct? Okay, so I was that.
It was phenomenal.
Crushed it, absolutely. It was great. So, but when I often talk to parents when their kids are going into the high school, and I'll say, well, what is your son or daughter going to do when they get into high school? And they're like, oh, they're going to join band. And I'm going to be like, okay, so you are going to be joining band as well. I say to the parents because of the commitment that the parents make. But then I also say it's phenomenal because the bond, you see the connections that are made, the camaraderie that is out there, and just seeing, as you were saying, you grew so much. That you get these different opportunities for confidence. This is different opportunities for friends that you may not have made before, and having those connections with people that have similar interests. It's not always football or not always athletics that is the key to high school. It's having more than that and different opportunities that can get you involved and get you engaged. And thank you to the two of you and many other people that have supported them through their endeavors and their journey through this. And most importantly, congratulations. Job well done.
Your parents will miss marching band.
I think that you all are a good example of our motto with tradition, pride, and excellence. You certainly have the excellence. It's incredible each time that you're on the field. It's really amazing what you do. And as Mr. Bradley just said, pride, I could cry every time you're out there because I just think of how hard we all know you've worked and what you've done. The tradition, Mechanicsburg always has a great music program all the way through, and I want to acknowledge that as part of your excellence is beginning with those little guys in 3rd or 4th grade, whenever they start now playing instruments. That makes a big difference too, and I appreciate all the time and effort you put into it and the model that you serve and the ambassadors you are for our district because you make us look really good. Thank you.
Tell a brief story here quickly. Mr. G loves to talk about developing humans and how marching band is a bastion of humanity. And I had the opportunity to watch every note of every performance this year. And one of the schools that we often compete against, who have a wonderful program and do amazing things year in and year out, their program this year, just some elements of it, and I don't understand all the scoring in marching band, but some elements of their program just didn't have it quite up to the same level as what ours was this year. And they kind of knew it, and everybody kind of knew it. But there's some parents from that program that I know, and they stopped me just last weekend, and they said, we realized pretty early on that our program this year just kind of was what it was, wasn't to the same level as you guys, but when our season turned around, it was when we were at a competition and the Mechanicsburg band that clearly had an amazing show this year took the time to be lined up, standing for us, cheering for us, encouraging us, and as we got off the field, they were giving us high fives. And the one parent that was saying there, who's the parent of a brand new 8th grader who was in this particular marching band, just said that it just turned the season around, especially for his son, who this was all new for him, and he didn't know what it was all about. In some ways it could have felt a little down about how things were going, but to know that they had this relationship with a competitive band that they were going up against just meant the world to them. And they were sure to say that the feelings they were expressing to me was not theirs alone, that other parents and directors from that other band felt much the same way. And I think that's just a small snapshot of the kind of humanity that these two definitely and the other staff and their leadership amongst the students do develop. So kudos to you.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
Just remember, follow your dots
That's right.
through life.
I was just going to say, it's organizations like the marching band that really impact the community because you show what the community is and what they do. And music is so important. This is a common focus, a common thing to work on for that excellence. And so, thank you again. I mean, I think the rest of the directors have said a lot as well, but you really became and you make it a great place to be and to be a good school as well. So thank you.
I'd just like to close as far as we're talking and saying, as a resident of West Main Street, I'm fortunate I get to hear you practice both in the high school parking lot and the stadium. And the amount of time and effort you folks put into it is just absolutely amazing. It always sounds nice, especially in the spring and fall when the windows are open. Hearing the music in the windows. Some might complain. I think it's pretty neat. And make sure too that you thank your parents for all the extra work they do for you. It's late night meals, picking up and dropping off, and puts a lot on them too. It certainly has paid off in what you've done. And to our two leaders, to all extracurricular leaders, I mean, the amount of time you folks put into it is amazing. You're certainly not doing it, for additional compensation. It's really a labor of love. It's what we're all about. It's great. In closing, Alice, I want to also thank you for your public service. She serves on the school board in Gettysburg. So well, we're recognizing directors, so I thought I'd recognize you. So she doesn't get enough during the day. She extends that into the evening also.
I was actually, this is my first time to your board meeting, so there you go. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for that.
Well, when our students come to be recognized, we like to give them a little bit of swag. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Right, move on to item 2.02, outgoing school board directors, Dr. Pitts.
Yeah, we want to just take a moment as we're recognizing different folks to be able to recognize this evening 2 of our outgoing board directors, and one is here with us tonight, so we'll start with Mr. Sanker. As a district, we just appreciate so much the giving of your time, your expertise, the support that you have given, the great questions that you have asked over the years. You've been an amazing advocate and ambassador for our school district, and we thank you for the time that you served on the board. Most specifically, I want to thank you as serving as vice president and the work that you've done on finance and facilities. There's no doubt in the last 8+ years there has been a lot of finance and facilities to discuss, and you've been able to bring your professional expertise appropriately to the table as a part of those conversations, and we wouldn't be where we are without the contributions you've made in that realm. And then you've been able to bring an extension of that to the CTC as well, and I am quite confident in saying that the CTC would not be where they are right now if it wasn't for the time that you dedicated to going to all 13 school districts, some of them multiple times, to advocate for the project that is taking place there. It's made a difference for students. So thank you for your service here and beyond.
Thanks for having kids here at the last meeting. It was really helpful versus the student expulsion vote and the teacher. So thank you. That was much better. Appreciate that.
I do want to take a moment to recognize Dr. Rhodes, who couldn't be with us here tonight, but he as well has been a part of our board through a busy time. He's been a big part of the decisions that we've made through lots of construction projects also. But he was also, as was mentioned by Mr. Bradley during our special meeting, an instrumental part of our response to COVID. And again, an opportunity for him to bring some of his professional expertise to the table, again, in an appropriate way to be able to help us through what was an unprecedented period of time for us as a school district. But beyond that, he served on the athletic program evaluation committee. He was a constant voice for extracurricular activities for our students, and similarly, just always had the importance of keeping our students at the heart of the decisions that we make. And he expressed that regularly, so we appreciate him and his time on the board as well. There's one more outgoing board director, but I'm going to save my comments about him until December because Mr. Rupp will be with us again in December to help us with the new board coming on. So we'll have a couple of things to say about that.
Thank you, Dr. Pitts. Move on to item 3, budget and finance. Item 3.01, general fund budget, revenue and expense trends. Dr. Pitts.
Yes, I'll get us started and then we'll pass the baton here after a couple slides. So this is the time of year where we regularly come forward and talk about some trends that we're seeing in the budget. You often are closing up things on the previous budget year and the audit from the previous year. You'll of course have a more formalized audit presentation from Z in a few meetings. But again, this is a time for us to be able to talk to some of the trends that we saw and what we're seeing so far in this budget year as well. So that's the point of tonight, is just to kind of prepare some of that information, preview some of that information. And it's really kind of the first step in moving towards the budget for 26-27. As Mr. Longwell likes to talk about, we're often living in 3 budget years. So we're talking about what happened in 24-25 and some of the trends that have spilled from 24-25 into the beginning part of 25-26. But we're already beginning to build the budget for 26-27. So again, most of this is focusing on the year end 24-25, but of course we're bridging into the trends moving forward. So I'm going to take you through a couple high-level charts first, because we don't want to bury the lead here. So I'll give you kind of the overall picture. Then we're going to dig into these items in more detail, and then we'll zoom back out to the overall picture again at the end. These first couple slides, you can certainly ask questions, but you can anticipate that after I talk through these summary slides, we're going to go into a lot of detail where you'll probably have, I'm sure, many more questions. So this slide is taking you through a variance analysis of the revenue from 24-25. And you can see on the left-hand side that when we budgeted for 24-25, that was looking at a total revenue of just under $100 million, with local at 73, state at 24, and feds at 675,000. Well, ultimately, as the year closes out for 24-25, where we found ourselves was at 107 million total, so, and a variance there of 7.8. We'll talk about where that variance comes from. So obviously on the local side, you can see that we were up a little bit, and Mr. Longwell will take you through some of the details of that, but we did see some increases in earned income tax and some of our real estate transfer dollars coming in. On the state side, much of that $2.4 million was in the adequacy supplement. So if you remember, that was the first year where the state began to try and right the ship from the fair funding lawsuit that went through the Supreme Court, so the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So with that, they began to give us some adequacy dollars, so we got more there than what we were anticipating. So that is a bulk of that $2.4 million. And then federal, this one does vary from year to year in terms of title grants. Again, this was 24-25. We remember that there was lots of questions as to whether we were going to get our money for here in 25-26. And of course, the question remains whether we can, how much we can budget for 26, 27. But in 24, 25, we were on the plus side in that. The 3.3 that you see in other financing sources, so this is going to be one that we come back to a couple times here in the presentation, but so you might remember that we have had a debt service fund through the construction projects over the last decade. That 3.3 was what was left in the debt service fund. So law actually says that you have to have your debt service fund before you can move it to capital reserve, which is often the case of what you typically would do. Before you do that, you have to move it through your general fund. So we had to bring it in as revenue from the debt service fund, already our money, but we had to bring it in through the general fund before we could do anything else with it. And as you'll see in the next couple slides, we're moving a bulk of that money, or about half of that money, into capital reserve fund for future project needs.
So are we gonna see that with and without the financing source, like on another slide?
Yeah, we'll talk more here.
So this is the expense side, the variance analysis on the expense side. And these are, again, categories that Mr. Longwell will walk you through a little bit. But you can see that salaries, we were just a little bit under. It's not unusual for our salaries to end up being a little bit under because we have different folks that are out off on maternity, or we have an opening that doesn't get filled right away, and that salary, obviously, that we don't end up incurring. So salaries were just a little bit under. Benefits, we'll talk quite a bit about benefits and purchase services. And we'll look at some slides that detail those. You can see that both of those were significantly over budget there in terms of both of those categories. Supplies and equipment, about 5% of our budget, as you'll see, that came in right about where we would expect. And then other objects and uses of funds, again, Mr. Longwell will take you through some of the details on that.
How are salaries that far off? That's like 10 positions, right?
So I would say the entirety of the salary base is about $40 million. And so when you think of it through that lens, because I agree with you, you see a 7-digit number of $1 million and you wonder about the variance there. But in total, all of our salaries are around 40 million. And so it is a combination of things, as Dr. Bitt said. It could be that we're, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to, we're never 100% staffed. And so there were some years, especially on post-COVID, where that was even bigger because we had such significant vacancies. The turnover, I'll say, also impacts that. So, when you have veteran teachers retiring and you're often bringing in maybe newer teachers, there is some offset there, right? Because we're budgeting, 12 and 18 months in advance. And then retire after we've adopted the budget, then sometimes we're finding out about retirements or resignations. And so I would say turnover is another factor there. So I would say it's vacancies, turnovers, leaves, a number of things that kind of go into that.
1 out of 40 million makes sense.
What's that?
I said 1 million out of 40 million makes sense.
Sure.
I get you. Thank you.
Sure. So to your point, when you look at it through that way, a $1 million variance, we were about 98% on. Right, in terms of the budget, so it was a couple percent off, but helpful context nonetheless.
So where that leaves us, we had budgeted a $2.3 million deficit that we were anticipating or budgeting to pull out of our fund balance to be able to balance the budget. Ultimately, this year, we are looking to realize and are realizing that budget deficit for the school year. So just a little bit less than that at 2.3. Ultimately, a chunk of that goes into the bottom table. So as I mentioned, the debt service transfer was in round numbers, $3.4 million was in that debt service pot that had to come through the general fund. And we could have obviously done some different things with that. We could have panicked, if you will, with the potential deficit and moved that or kept that money in the general fund to try and say that we weren't going to use any out of the general fund or out of the fund balance. But ultimately, we know that we do still have small projects to take care of. We know that we've got a number of HVAC systems that still need replacement. We know that we've got some roofing that is going to be coming on. We know that there's a number of smaller items on the facilities planning that we need to continue to address. So we really need that debt service fund money to go into the capital reserve fund. But we also know that in this past year, also within the general fund on the expense side, we also paid the $1.8 million to contribute to the CTC construction. So what we decided to do was take the 1.8 million out of the debt service fund essentially, and simply move the 1.6 over from the debt service fund through the general fund, and then over into the capital reserve fund. So ultimately, that's where you end up with the 2.3 actualized deficit for 24-25.
So did we budget for the CTC fund payment, or did that come after the?
So we had planned to take it out of one of our various reserves. And I think in an ideal world, had we not had some negative budget variances, the general fund wouldn't have been impacted in the same way. And so we would have had even more options, but because of some of the trends we'll talk about around medical and certain other categories, it put the general fund into a position where it was a deficit. And so then as we were reconciling the other buckets, I'll say, of reserves, we, as Dr. Bitt said, decided to use net down that debt service transfer and keep some of the general fund to offset the CTC. Really, for the board, maybe to what Mr. Up's, where he's heading here, is way back when we were talking about the CTC project, we made a decision. So did we want to finance the project with other schools, or did we want to pay in cash? And ultimately, we were among a number of districts that decided to pay in cash. Some districts had different approaches to it, some 4 or 5 through kind of a joint borrowing, but ultimately that's where we ended there.
And that's gonna be a one-time,
Yes.
1.8 million.
Yeah.
That's not normal.
And so that's where, I mean, you have some unique stuff happening here in the general fund, as Dr. Bitt shared, that kind of reconciliation on the bottom, the debt service fund transfer, the culmination of the financing plan. There was the one-time money for the CTC construction project. We're also transferring some money into the capital reserve fund, which it does happen a little more often. As the board knows, over the years, if we have extra surplus in the general fund, we do transfer it over to the capital reserve fund. But ultimately, we're trying to be mindful of where's the general fund, how we're building that debt service fund, what's going on with the capital reserve fund, because that's our 3 to 5 year kind of planning horizon for facilities projects. So reconciling a variety of things there.
And if you remember nothing else from the CTC project, this was a bargain for our district compared to the other 12. But like the way that we accelerated our enrollment isn't reflected totally in contribution amount here. So we're actually going to get more benefit out of it than the less than 10% we have to put into it. We're going to reap more benefit later on from. So I think it's still a good deal, though. It is also interesting to see it in this context.
And then Mr. Sank's point had to use more recent enrollment trends that we put out probably a much different list out there associated with that.
Yeah, within that time period, we went from 75-ish to 100.
There was a calculation that accounted for it. I think we went 75, 25, historical versus projected or capacity, whatever. So it wasn't that we just happened to, it just worked out really well, but that's what we were anyway. So good for us. This is still a deal.
So obviously not an end of year that we're used to. So it begs the question of what all contributed to that. And I know we shared some of that along the way with some of the trends as we discussed last year, but we have some year-end trending to be able to share as to really what put us in this unique situation this past year.
Well, before we jump into the trends, I'll just kind of underscore something Dr. Bitt said, because he's absolutely right. In the 10 years I've been here, this will be the first deficit for me. And even in my 15 or 16 years, it's still my first deficit. And so we'll talk a little bit about the reasons for that. But I think that's where we don't want to be in a panic mode because of 1 year with some anomaly type stuff running through it. That's why we have a reserve, and we'll talk more about that here as we go.
No, I don't think I've ever seen that before either.
Yeah.
24 years.
Yeah. I was gonna say with Dr. Andrew, I'm sure that was very similar. Yeah, very similar. So Dr. Bitts shared a little bit of revenue, kind of the three buckets of local, state, and federal. And so in particular, when you think about revenues and what some of the significant changes are, I would say you could point to real estate taxes, where maybe assessed values have grown and outpaced what even we had projected. We look at earned income tax, which is a big aspect of our budget in terms of local revenue, interest income. All three of those are some of the local revenues that we'll talk about here this evening in terms of the trends. The state subsidy, obviously state funding, and in particular, as Dr. Bitts said, in response to the fair funding lawsuit, they're starting to see the state increase funds to try to bring more equity to how they fund the 500 schools. So, because we've added 20% enrollment over the last 10 years, and as our board knows, as we know, back in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, we weren't seeing the proportional increases that we probably otherwise should have because of how fast we were growing in terms of enrollment. So in some ways, the state's coming back and I think trying to help pay down some of that inequity or fix some of that inequity. So we'll talk more about that here in the presentation. And then in terms of expenses, when we talk about what are some of the most significant expenses that impacted the general fund, benefit expense, in particular medical, teachers, special education, particularly placements, PA charter schools, and then transportation are some of the expense areas where we had some negative variances that we want to talk through with the board and provide some additional context. This chart probably is a familiar one for the school board. The one thing I'll mention as we dive into it here is it's the proportional, how are we funded as a school district? So 73% local, 26% state, and then 1% federal. As the board knows, for years and years, we were probably closer to 75% local and more like 23% state. But because of in the last year or two, some of that additional state funding, it started to shift that percentage a little bit. So that's why I say I'm not sure the state's completely done with, leveling the playing field, if you will, but I think they are taking steps to help get additional funds in to address the inequities, and we would hope to continue to see that rebalance a little bit as additional funds come in from the state level.
So to attribute that to increased amount in the state budget overall, or the new funding formula addressing our growth?
I wouldn't say
the adequacy of the new funding formula is part of the driving force of that slight. It's going in the right direction.
Dr. Bitts' point, so adequacy really, I think, is the most recent vehicle to address that inequity. And then the basic education funding formula, where it was years and years and years of hold harmless, they did implement a number of years ago, probably around 15, 16, somewhere in there, a new formula for new money moving forward, which does take into effect other things like enrollment or market value ratio, things like that. But really the adequacy piece is more in response to the inequity that already had existed. So
the federal at 1% has been at 1% forever.
Yeah.
Do you ever anticipate that may increase?
I don't think
there's a high
Okay,
probability. There's a high probability it will go down based on what happened this past year, and basically them telling us that several of the titles were going to go away, and then ultimately they didn't, thankfully, because they had already been promised to us. But I think the writing was on the wall that we shouldn't necessarily anticipate that happening.
Remind me when this, if it goes down, those titles affect early literacy. What are the other three just didn't like? If I were to call them poverty, like what are we describing?
Yeah, it's SES, so socioeconomic status, reading in particular, services to immigrants, and English language services.
So those things just have to be picked up by the rest of the budget then?
If they do.
Or not provided to those students?
Correct.
Okay.
So we'll be looking really at that very carefully, all of the federal revenues, but in particular what we get in terms of Title 2, 3, or 4. So we talked about real estate tax revenue. It is one of the largest revenue streams in the budget. When you look at revenue, local, state, federal, in totality, about $100 million. A little over half of it is real estate taxes, is how we're funded as a school district. And so when you look at how real estate tax revenue has been trending in terms of increases, there's obviously the kind of the operational increase, the increase that we set aside for our financing plan. Those are ways that real estate taxes increase because through the vote we've adjusted our millage. But the second way that real estate taxes increase, maybe I'll say more naturally or organically, is through assessed value growth. And assessed value growth is new neighborhoods, it's new commercial properties, although we have a lot of neighborhoods, not so many commercial properties. And you can kind of see the trends there. The red bar gives you the percentage of assessed value growth through the years. I'll say this, the 2.8, the 3.4, and the 2.9 are kind of the peaks that are outliers. They're not typical. They're each a unique situation. Like the 2.8% was when the Cy Lifeways added on and doubled their assessed value. The 3.4% was like Allen Distribution's warehouses coming online. And so Dr. Betts and I look at those things. We look at that with Mrs. Ely, but we don't budget the peaks because that just isn't a typical event in Mechanicsburg. It's frankly, we're funded more through residential as a proportion of assessed values. And so it's an important thing to look at in terms of the trends, but then we try to add some context to those trends to say, where should we really be looking when we're projecting forward assessed value growth? Earned income tax revenue is also one of our biggest revenue line items, as the board knows. You can see 2015-16 through, I'll say, the pandemic, 2021. Those years, probably year over year, we were seeing growth of 3, 4, 5%, depending on which year you're talking about, which is pretty typical back then for a long time in Pennsylvania. And it was kind of always confirmed through the independent fiscal office at the state level that earned income taxes, personal income taxes were growing pretty steadily at that 3, 4, and 5%. We were maybe a little ahead of the curve just because of what trends we saw locally. But then you turn the chapter post pandemic, and then especially as we've been growing, you can see how that line is arcing up faster. And that upward arc, those are more like 8 and 10 and 12% increases in earned income taxes. And again, that's something we try to be very careful about because you don't want to fall in love with budgeting the peak in any one of those years. I would submit that 10 or 12% in any given year is a good thing for us, but I don't think it's going to be 10% a year for the next 20 years. That's just not something we've seen historically. And so that's something that we try to be very careful of and conservative when we're looking at earned income taxes and saying to what degree should we adjust the budget. Interest income. For a while, this was, years ago, 2015, 16, 17, 18, I'm not even sure we really were talking about interest income very much in our budget presentations. You can actually see in 2021 and 21, 22, it actually bottomed out because that was when interest rates were at historic lows. And so if you were borrowing money, that was a good time to be borrowing money. If you had money in the bank and were earning interest or dividends, maybe not such a good time. And we saw that really reduce there. On the other side of that, though, as the interest rates have risen, which is certainly an issue around borrowing, it has benefited us in terms of interest revenue and interest income. So you can see our interest income went up above, in 23-24, it was up above $1.5 million, I'll say. 24-25, we saw that come down a little bit as interest rate environment starts to change. I think even as we head into 25-26 and 26-27, we know the Fed keeps making changes. We see kind of where the interest rate environment's heading. So we'll be mindful of that. We don't want to budget the peak in 23-24 because that probably is the one outlier in the last 20 years. But we'll be mindful of where the interest rate environment's heading and what we want to do as far as a budget there around interest income.
And just expect that, we can expect that to be lower too because of the fact that the state budget impasse made us spend dollars. Is that what you're going to say, Tim? All right.
Well, it will be $50,000 shorter this year because of the state budget. Yes.
But they made more money
Yes. That's,
per school district.
yes. Because it was in the treasury, they were still collecting income taxes, personal income taxes rather, I think at the state level, but and they were still earning on that reserve while we were using our reserves to bridge the gap. So state subsidy, you can see in the from 2000, if you're working left to right, 2015, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, as you're moving through those years, typically what we would see in terms of basic education funding or some of our biggest state subsidies, we might get another $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 a year, and you can kind of see that in the bar charts. I would say then over the last 2 or 3 years, you can see a more upward arcing trajectory, especially in 24-25, because you can see 24-25, we've got some additional money in basic ed, which is the maroon bar, but then you can also see that the addition of that adequacy supplement, which is what I think Dr. Pitts had referred to earlier, in response to the fair funding lawsuit, the inequity at state level, they've started to fund money through that vehicle, that adequacy supplement. And sometimes you also hear it referred to as the Ready to Learn Block Grant. In the technical world, it's the Ready to Learn Block Grant, but they also refer to it as the adequacy supplement coming through that Ready to Learn Block Grant. The other thing I'll point out here, in 24-25, you see that little bit of a black bar there. That was the charter school transition funding. So in 24-25, some of their response to charter school funding reform, the advocacy efforts was, well, we'll reimburse school districts some measure, right? $300,000 or $400,000 was what that number was for us. But then in 25-26, they kind of reversed course and said, well, maybe we don't want to do reimbursements, so we'll take that out of the budget. But instead, they're going to adjust the tuition calculation for charter schools. And I know in Dr. Pitts' one of his recent updates for the board, we had discussed, or he had described what that looks like from our perspective. The latest estimates from HASBO seem to suggest it might be a one-for-one wash, because that was one of our concerns, is if we take the revenue out, well then how much savings are we going to realize when they adjust the formula? And for now, at least it looks like it could be potentially one-for-one. Once we have more information on that, we'll certainly return to the board, likely as part of the budget process, because we'll have several more presentations as we move into the winter months. But this is a look at state subsidy, especially around basic ed, adequacy, and then lastly, the other thing I'd point out is we would love to see that bar grow higher, quicker, because our costs, and it's in one of the future slides here, our costs are continuing to increase at a rate that gray bar is not increasing proportionally at the same rate. So that's another point of the role. So in a similar kind of way, if you kind of say in a snapshot what makes up our budget in terms of expenses, you can see wages, benefits, 37 and 28%. So collectively, our school district budget is about 65% in terms of personnel costs. And then you can see purchase services at 19%. Purchase services, this bucket has a lot of things in it. So I can just share for context, it includes things like the contract with BNS for transportation. It includes our student service placements, our special ed placements. It includes charter school costs. It's a wide variety of things. And purchase services are all largely contractual, and it's a wide array of services that are provided to the district, our students, and our programs. Supplies and equipment, 5%, and other financing at 11%. I always like to share from a debt service perspective that 11%, that's really our mortgage payment, if you will, in terms of our financing plan and how we paid issued debt and how we paid for all of our construction. Generally in school districts, you like to see that at 10 or 11% or maybe lower. So that's a good benchmark. 10 or 11% is what we look at when we look at our budget. We look at some benchmarking. The only other thing I wanted to say here on the slide was in terms of supplies and equipment at 5%, electricity's in there, natural gas is in there. So there's a variety of other things in that bucket too. It's not just, copy paper and, pencils. It's a variety of things there. So we did a lot of talking there at the beginning of the presentation about what were some of the most negative variances and really what was impacting our budget in terms of that $2.3 million deficit. Outside of kind of the discussion around CTC and the debt service and the capital reserve fund, when you really look at the budget and say, in terms of our budget, in terms of our actual, what was the most significant variances? One of the most significant or the most significant variance is medical expense, frankly. And so one thing we've looked at over the years, and we've probably talked to the board, I know through presentations or even negotiations, is typically we've seen an 8% trend in medical. And we benchmark that at what's a 3-year average, what's a 5-year average, what's a 7-year average, what's a 10-year average. And for a very long time, at all of those intervals, it was always like 8%, give or take. And then you kind of enter stage left, the 23, 24, and 24, 25 years, And you can see how both of those years really took a sharp turn upward. In fact, if you look at 22-23, that's about $8.6 million. 23-24 is about 11 million, which was a 27% increase just from 22-23 to 23-24. And then that increase from 23-24 to 24-25 is about 12.7 million. And that was another 17% increase in health insurance costs. And so if you look at 23-24 and 24-25 taken together, you're at 27% plus the 17%. We're north of 40% for just those 2 years in terms of year-over-year cost increases. The trend that we frankly had seen, you can kind of see in the bar charts, we would have kind of a good year, so to speak, then we would have an increase. Then it would like level back off, or we'd have a good year, then we'd have an increase. And so through 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, you can kind of see that pattern where it was increasing, leveling off, increasing, leveling off. And so, I mean, frankly, that was my hope, was when you looked at 23-24, that was a sharp increase, but the past had kind of said, well, it might level back off again. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. And it didn't even happen to the tune of 8%, which was typically our trend. It was followed by another 17% increase. And so a big impact there in terms of our costs. But
This is our payout of medical expense. My question is, how much of that you think was related to the start of the last contract and any change in what we provided in terms of cost sharing with the plan participants? That might be not off the top of your head answer. So
yeah, I would say
the chart looks like a lot different, by the way, than that it's not like it's just from that. But I was curious about that.
Well, I would say this. We can talk through the factors that impacted, particularly 23-24, 24-25. Negotiations, I think, on some level would always impact medical expense rate, because you're either looking at how many covered lives you have on the plan. You're looking at what the cost sharing percentage is. So to what degree does the district pay versus to what degree does the employee pay, and how do you divide that cost share? That's things like deductible and HSA contributions and premium share and co-insurance, and all of that gets into that what degree do employees or employer pay. And then I would say thirdly, plan design is another element of it. And so plan design, you could say that is, do we cover certain specialty drugs, which is what we'll talk about here in a minute. So that's kind of the three in my mind as I look at health insurance when we talk about negotiations or what are costs influenced by healthcare. It's always those three areas or some combination of those three areas. With respect to 24-25, when you look at medical, so the general inflators for healthcare trend, I would say this is from Conrad Siegel, and it's kind of at a national level. So post-COVID, general inflationary, what you had was, interestingly, on the other side of 2020, as you went into 21 and 22, and we even saw this trend too, medical expenses were a little bit flat, and it was almost like it took a little bit of time for it to catch back up again. And that certainly has been seen in other sectors as well by Conrad Siegel. New treatments and technologies, some of those carry some pretty costly, pretty high costs associated with them. Rising pharmacy costs, I would say especially specialty drugs, and we'll get into that here a little bit on the bottom of the slide. Healthcare staffing shortages, so some of the same things we've been facing for a number of years, they've been facing, and so what do they do about wages? How does that impact the cost of providing care? All of that kind of comes into play here when we're talking about healthcare. Increasing demand for mental health services, and then provider consolidation. And so provider consolidation is you get less people in the market to compete against each other, and to what degree then, or how competitive are they in their pricing? So those are some general, I'll say, national trends. So one thing when Dr. Bitts and I look at, okay, so what are things specific to Mechanicsburg? What happened? What's the story with 24-25? The first box there talks about specialty drug. So I'll share, when you look at 23-24, I know we're throwing out a lot of years, but 24-25, so that year-over-year increase. In 23-24, we had 22 specialty drugs that cost about $1.2 million. In 24-25, those same 22 specialty drugs cost about 2.4 million. So we saw a $1.2 million increase just in those 22 specialty drugs. A component of that is GLP-1 drugs. So a component of that 1.2 million, not all of the 1.2 million, but a component of it was GLP-1 indication. And the reason we kind of call that out separately is GLP-1 drugs have existed for quite some time to help with diabetes, but it's really more of a recent year issue, last 2 or 3 years, where we've seen a sharp uptick in GLP-1 drugs for weight loss. So GLP-1 drugs, things like Ozempic, those types of advertisements you're seeing on TV. You can see the weight loss indication is up 614%. In one of our most recent estimates for 2025, GLP-1 by themselves will be about 500,000 or more by themselves for the school district. Where you go back 3 or 4 years, and it was probably zero.
For weight loss.
For weight loss indication, for weight loss indication, yes. Because to Dr. Bitz's point, the diabetes indication, that's always existed on some level. It's really the weight loss is where we're seeing the most significant change. That speaks a little bit to the high cost scripts that's there. The other thing I think for 24-25 is we really try to unpack and say, why did healthcare increase so significantly, is high claimants. So you can see from 2021 on, those above 10,000, so those are individuals above 10,000. You can see in 2021 we were at 150, and then fast forward to 24-25, kind of an upward trend there. 24-25 we had 240, and so just very back of the napkin, that's a 90-person increase at 10,000 and above. And it's probably not fair to do the math like this, but 10,000 times 90 is 900,000. And I recognize it's not exactly that, but just as an example, when you talk about the frequency with which people are exceeding $10,000 has increased, and I think that's part of the story. The other part of the story is around,
Sorry. The 10,000, does that include like medical, like hospital, or is that including the drugs too?
So it's everything. It's RX, it's hospitalization, anything medical related that would be coming through capital. Conrad Siegel is aggregating that, and then they track, frankly, they regularly track the people over 150,000 because that gets into our stop loss and our attachment point. But when they really try to look at, okay, what happened last year, because they do take an in-depth analysis with Dr. Betts, myself, Mrs. Ely, they also go back and look at the frequency with which people were above 10,000 just to say what's happening in terms of total utilization across the plan, but particularly those higher dollar claimants. So it's all inclusive.
So the 240 above 10,000 would be hospital visit or, so it's a claim, it is a claim that exceeds $10,000. It's not accumulated over the course of a year, they're over. It's somebody went in, likely hospital stay, hospital visit, and it is the total amount of that one claim was above $10,000.
So one claim, not a whole year's worth.
Not a whole year's worth, it's a one claim.
So we had 240 incidences of a claim,
Claims
an
cost,
incident going over that event. Right.
Because it could be,
That would be from start to finish.
it could be cancer medicine.
Right, where they were going it over.
You go into the hospital for a week, claim comes back, it's gonna be $12,000. That's
Mine was 17 for 5 days.
right.
But like with chemo, would that be considered one event
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, medicine, the series of chemo would be counting for this, yeah.
Right, so in theory, each event could be over, each part of that could be over the 10,000, but the show is one.
So it's not
under the same-
240 people per se. 240, there could be one person with chemo 10 times and that would count as 10 of the 240.
This would be in the aggregate. So these are, Greg Longwell has $20,000 worth of claims versus, say, another individual that might have 10,000. So they're going through and looking at a claimant by claimant basis.
But
Plus,
it could be
kids
one
under
person
the plan,
having multiple.
Yeah, there's a ton of people on the plan too, right? So there's a lot more.
More than just our employees.
Right. Sorry, Tracy. So a family plan.
So it's, and Mr. Sanker makes a good point. We have over 1,000 people on the plan because it's not just the employees, it's the employees and their spouses, and then So high-dollar claimants is something that we've been looking at. The issues above 150,000, those are the ones that also add up pretty significantly. And I'll say that, in the earlier years, like 1920, 2021, we might have had one or two. But then you've seen that kind of arc upward to like 5, 9, 8. And not only are they 150, they're 200, 250,000 claims as well. I think maybe as we're talking about this, I want to just add one point of clarification. When I say aggregate, the 150, the 164, I wouldn't appear multiple times on the list. I would be one person in total. And so I think that's what I mentioned.
I think that's what I'm asking, if like 240 could be, like one person had 10 events.
Oh, yeah, this would be 240 people.
So they're definitely 240 separate people.
And each person could have more than one event.
Because they're looking at claimants, because when they aggregate claims, they're like, our attachment point, for instance, is 300,000. So it's in the aggregate that we would get reimbursed. So if I had something significant happen to me, like a heart attack or something, and I was at $300,000 or $400,000, they would look at the aggregate of my claims over the course of the year, and above 300,000 we would get reimbursed because of the attachment point.
Well, you would think with all the people that are on the weight loss drugs, we would have less claims health-wise.
Well, and I think that's probably, frankly, part of it. Those weight loss drugs are probably $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 for the year per person. So if you think about that in the context of 150 to 240, that's prescription drug too. And so some of that specialty drugs that are counting there. Pension is another one. So in terms of PSERS, this one has started to level off, but pension's been hovering right around 34%. And so when you look at that, that's 34 cents on the dollar. So for that $40 million of salary, 34% of that is what we pay into PSERS. And so you can see the results right around 13.5 million, getting closer to 14 million. I think it's important to note that about half of that is reimbursed by the state. So you can see that in the gray bars. So usually when we look at that and net it down, we would say 17% is what is the district's net cost connected to PSERS. Special education subsidies, so expenses there in the red, the maroon, continuing to increase there. Really, it's a trend that I think you're seeing regionally or at a state level. Probably the biggest thing to point out is the gray, the steel bar there, is not keeping pace proportionally with the expenses that we're seeing. Special education in these past couple of years has been on an upward trajectory, and certainly is a factor in terms of how we ended the year.
We used to be shocked at looking at the chart for cyber school, and this is the shocking one now.
Well, the cyber school is coming up.
Next page.
Shocked again.
Yeah. But to your point, Ms. Morgan, I think 2015-16, you can see we're just above 8 million. By 24-25, a little over 14. And the state keeps contributing somewhere in that $2 to $3 million range generally, year over year. And so that's something we're trying.
At least this slide, the investment's worth it compared to the charter school, results that they put out that are abysmal. So this feels like, oh yes, I wish the gray line kept up with the red line. That I feel like the money well spent at least.
We're doing the right thing.
That's right. Yeah, thank you.
PA Cyber Charter School, red line there, maroon line. So you can see in 2020-21, the pandemic, that was typical for a lot of school districts, and we saw it kind of come back down a little bit. But ultimately, as is the case with many school districts around us and at state level, continuing to see an upward trajectory there in terms of cost. Cost is a function of two things here with cyber charter schools. One, obviously your enrollment, which you can see there in terms of the trend lines, but you can also look at cost in terms of our own cost, because the tuition calculation is based on our cost. And so when we do the annual calculation with the PD 363, as our cost goes up, the tuition rate goes up as well, and that translates to increasing annual cost. And the second part of that enrollment, you can see in 2015-16 where we were in terms of enrollment. The steel bar there is our regular education students enrolled at cyber charter schools, and then the black is our special education students enrolled at cyber charter schools, and then you can kind of see how that trends forward. I think the other thing that's probably important to point out here too is, yes, we have an increasing number of students in cyber charter school, which is something we are investigating administratively. But the other piece too is over the last 10 years, we've grown by 20%. So on some level, you would expect cyber charter enrollment, even if it stayed proportional the whole way through, to have grown as well. So that's kind of what that kind of steel box, the gray box here in the bottom left corner, is speaking to. In 15-16, it was 3% of our total enrollment. In 24-25, it was 5%. So we've seen a little bit of an uptick in terms of the number of students that are going out as a percentage of our total enrollment, but also just because we're growing, you would expect to see more students.
All right. I mean, I think we have to ask why, the COVID spike was the highest we ever had the number of kids in cyber school. And you can see like the next year how many came back, but what is the reasoning for it besides increase of kids? But I mean, I wouldn't expect that to be higher than COVID.
There's a variety of reasons. I think one, you have to say the marketing's pretty strong, marketing effort.
But that they've always had the marketing.
Sure. I think another piece probably is around when you look at. So we've taken a deeper dive with this. I remember there was a time a number of years ago, Dr. Bitts, myself, Mr. Baker, we went through and kind of mapped out all the kids on the list just to see, and we looked back a number of years too to see, well, what was the story? Like, were they in our school district? Did they transfer in from outside another school district? And some portion of the kids, not all of them admittedly, but there are some portion of kids where they're moving their residences and they're just staying out in the cyber charter school. So we have some kiddos that are out in cyber charter school that never stepped foot in our buildings at Mechanicsburg. And so it's a little challenging to try to go to those families and talk about, obviously we value being a Wildcat and the benefits we see in our school system. But some of those families have been out in cyber charters for so many years. And
you're saying they moved here from another district and their kids stayed in cyber charter?
They'd already be out in cyber charter. Right. Now, that's not to, in fairness, that's not to say, we certainly have had some situations where kids have gone out from Mechanicsburg to cyber charter for any number of reasons, but I don't think it can be boiled down to just one or two things, unfortunately.
But with us offering COLA, you would think that would help. COLA, sorry. Keola.
Close.
COLA, I knew it wasn't right. With us offering that, you would think that would help the spikiness that we have.
We don't offer that like CCA is offered, though. You know what I mean? It's not like it's you can choose to be all online. Like, we're not promoting it. We did it in COVID, but even then, like, it's still not it's not the same. I don't think it's as aware, or people aren't as aware of it.
I think you also saw during COVID that something like Keola, which we went to astronomical numbers from like 40 kids in Keola to like 500 overnight.
It was like almost like Elmwood.
But you saw in that specific situation, families that wanted to remain Wildcats, they wanted to remain Mechanicsburg. But outside of those circumstances, you have families that being part of Mechanicsburg isn't a draw. And you also see families where the oldest child goes to Keola, and then that becomes what they end up doing with the younger children as well. So frankly, for me, when I look at this, it's something we continue to look at. How do we make sure that if somebody is going to cyber, then that they're looking at Keola as an option and hopefully choose that because it's at least half the cost, if not more. But still being in this 3 to 5% range of total enrollment is where I think, we're gonna be. The bigger concern is the fact that you can see in 15-16, a quarter, we were at about a quarter of them, 27 for special education enrollment, and now almost half special education enrollment, we're at 82. And ultimately, you're talking about double the cost when a special education student goes. And there's obviously lots of assumptions and beliefs, I think, from public schools about when students are getting identified as special education, whether it's happening with the best of process that we use here. But all we know is that we pay double regardless of whether the student's simply getting speech and language or some other more intensive program.
Are the cyber schools identifying kids as special ed? So that is an incentive for them to
Absolutely.
identify them as special ed.
Yeah, they get 31,000 instead of 15. And I guarantee you, because the Auditor General showed that they're not getting double the programming for that 31,000 over the 15,000 everybody. So that, of all the stories that could be told about that, that's the biggest issue in my mind is the special education.
So the amount of work that we have to do in a school district to identify a child as special ed and, the IEPs and all that, like, how do we know that the cyber schools are just as qualified to identify these things? And
we don't.
And oftentimes it's students who are not identified that way here, and then they go there and they get identified.
And there's
without being in a classroom with the teacher to observe them.
And regardless of whether it's a speech and language impairment, which I say that because that's probably generally one of the least intensive special ed needs versus someone who has very high level autism needs, that sort of thing. But either way, we're paying the same.
And I think, said another way, or at least another piece of data to add to this conversation is, to Dr. Bitz's point, if you think about last year's regular ed rate, 24-25, was like 15,000, and the special ed rate was 31,000. So it's like a $16,000 delta. If you take $16,000 times 82 kids, that's like $1.3 million. And I think I would wonder if they're spending $1.3 million, the charter schools collectively, on our 82 students that have been identified as special education, because when we use the formula to calculate that 31,000, it includes the totality of all of our special needs kids, including some of our highest dollar kiddos. So it seems a little disconnected then that would be how we calculate the special ed costs. But then the students that are being identified, to Dr. Bitz's point, that are being serviced in an online environment probably aren't those very high dollar intensive students. And so in some ways they're getting paid for that, but maybe they're not providing that same level of service to those students. I think from an advocacy perspective, that one's a little bit of an easier one to pick at or kind of point out, because it truly is supposed to be it's special ed tuition, and if one would, I think you could suggest, if they're not spending the special ed tuition on the special needs students and IEP students, then it would seem that the formula should probably be revised.
So with the budget that was passed, they didn't drop down to that 8,000 that originally was discussed.
So, no, is the short answer. So last year they did the reimbursement, netted us about $400,000. This year, and credit to them, the adjustments to the formula to determine that 15,000 and 31,000, I would suggest are good adjustments. They are adjustments that I think are worthwhile and will help some districts. But ultimately, it's repainting the room, not renovating the room, because it's still going to be $400,000 for us. It's really no difference. So it's changing the formula, but they didn't come anywhere close to saying that there would be a rate, a standard rate across the state.
No, I'm sorry. Why can't we even have a rate for each, like you know.
Standard rate, yeah.
Well, not a standard rate for if the child is, you know, deaf, or if the child just has a speech impairment, you know, like different levels or different costs for that.
That's what Governor Shapiro was advocating for with the $8,000 rate, and there was discussion of agreement on a rate potentially, but it not necessarily being 8,000. But obviously, through negotiations, ultimately the rate didn't come through at all. So we'll see. Did you try again?
I think in the school district world, we will often talk among our colleagues or with local legislators about, they already kind of do that with the special education. Maybe just more to your point, like when you think about the special education formula, Act 16 categorizes our students based on costs, and that helps to proportionally divide out special education funding across the state. So when they're talking about what to pay the schools, they're already in some level taking into effect those levels of need and the cost of those needs. Versus once it gets over here to the 363 with the cyber charter tuition, then it's all the costs go into a bucket and they divide it across the ADMs, and it's probably not as representative, frankly.
I was going to say, back on your earlier point of the students who have never set foot in the district or inside one of our buildings. I had moderated a session at the PSBA conference last month, and it was on communications, but the one superintendent from Ben Salem School District in Philly was describing that they have a brick and mortar charter within their district, and that charter had open houses that were like invitations, and it seemed like an exclusive thing to bring those students out of public ed and into this charter. And so what they found was effective for Ben Salem was to hold open houses and actually just, engage the parents here within the district. And I know that we talked about engagement before with homeschool and charter kids in the past, but I do think that there's a way to have something not as full blown as the open houses we had when we opened one of the buildings, but a way to see this at between 12 and 31,000 a student. It seems worthwhile to maybe schedule, like, why don't we have to do this annually? Why don't you come in at 10 o'clock and meet our principal and check the boxes that we saw you on, and go play on the playground while you're here or whatever, So that's just a takeaway from that I thought was worthwhile.
Yeah, that was
credit to Mrs. Woodall and Mrs. Gross. They have canvassed neighborhoods, some neighborhoods where we know that there's a number of families that have made this choice to go door to door and say, hey, come on back to us. So definitely some efforts, and that's a good example of another effort. It's challenging once they've made the decision.
So as we kind of close out this slide, I think, we think about those several factors that impacted the 24-25 budget. We talked about medical, talked about kind of special education costs, student service costs rising. Cyber charter was the third one, where you can see we went from probably like 4.2 million to just under just about $5 million in terms of 23-24, 24-25. And then lastly, probably the fourth factor that we want to talk about here this evening is transportation expense. So it's probably a little hard to read there. The maroon is our buses and the steel is our vans. And so when you look at the lines themselves, you can see the graph is showing you two things. One is total costs that we're paying, but also the number of vehicles that we have. And so when you look at the marine line along the top there, we traditionally had probably like starting in 2015, 2016, probably we're around 26, 27 buses. And then you can fast forward to 24, 25, and you can see we're about 29 buses. And then you can see the bar chart, the marine bar chart shows the cost that has increased along the way. The costs have increased really as a function of our contracts that we have with BNS, because we haven't added too many buses. You can see through that, 10 or 11 years there, probably added 2 or 3 buses along the way, which would certainly impact cost on some level, but also as we've negotiated with BNS to kind of look at, transportation costs in general, or it's like a very competitive environment. But we've also looked at how can we partner with BNS Transportation on driver wages because of the significant shortages that were happening. And frankly, that has improved from my perspective. When you look at vans, the similar type exercise, the steel bars there are total costs. And then the line itself is the number of vans that we have. That's held pretty steady in terms of the number of vans. I would say the cost increases are a function of, in part, our contract negotiations along the way with BNS. It's that competitive environment, but also with vans in particular, because we pay vans on the state formula, which takes into effect like mileage, unloaded miles, loaded miles, number of kids on the van, how old is the van. There's a pretty complex formula. Ultimately, we've added pretty significantly miles and number of students on vans because of special needs or other accommodations. And so it's frankly a factor in our budget for 23, 24, 24, 25 in particular.
So going back to a comment I made, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, when checking the invoices and the bills, I was, seeing all these third-party drivers for one child. And, at that point you said, you would try to see if we can gain some more vans that would be cheaper, way cheaper. So I wasn't, do you have any movement or any news on that?
So it's a good question. I would say when we place students on vans, we first try to use BNS because it's the cheapest. It's based on formula, the state formula. Then we try to use the IU through really the intermediate unit offers kind of a consortium look at van transportation. So if they have capacity, we use them. And then thirdly, to your point, Ms. Morgan, we also use third-party contracted van services. They are easily the most expensive of the three options. And so we do try to be mindful. We've been talking with Scott about how can we try to limit the number of third-party contracted vans we use. And so some of that is, frankly, trying to make sure our vans are well utilized. So those 29 or 30 vans we have, how can we roster them in a way that we're not adding additional van runs and then we can maybe use those 29 or 30. We've been talking to Scott also about, where is he with drivers, the opportunity for additional vans. Some of it's a little bit of a trick because he's got upwards of 30 vans and another 29 or 30 buses. And so the driver market, I would say from an employer perspective, is a little disadvantaged. I think we see around some of the schools around us, they're struggling with finding van drivers or bus drivers. Pretty fortunately, we're almost 100% staffed, or probably are 100% staffed, but we want to be careful that we don't just add vans or buses with the hope that we can find a driver or drivers, because sustainability becomes a component there, right? You don't want to just add 3 new runs only to not be able to staff it, and then we're consolidating or doubling back or making students late. So we do try to think about that as we think about how we deploy our vans.
I think this chart shows that it's expensive to run this well, and we're running things well. And when you look at the problems in other districts, I know we talked about it too, but to see it again, and I have to say, BNS is great, and compared to not having school that day because we can't get enough drivers, that happened this year, or having to have an ad hoc transportation committee of the board just to figure out what to do, like our other neighbor it still has to do, and the fact that day after day the buses show up and the kids get on the bus that are new and newer and work. I think this is not a miracle, but it's certainly, we're in a much better position than our neighbors are, and so I'm happy in a sense. This is another good money well spent.
Well, that's kudos to the administration for identifying this and working with BNS. I know that the costs were more expensive, but yeah, you have neighboring school districts that are paying parents to bring their kids to school or just cancel.
Or closing buildings, rotating virtual.
So
we're still paying $500 to drive one child to Carlisle and back.
It had nothing
Every
to do
day.
with what you were saying.
Every day. So
Yeah, and I completely agree. That's something we want to continue to look at. It's just we have some constraints in terms of driver availability, vehicle availability.
yeah. John has nothing to do next
Disrupt.
week.
Yeah. We'll pass your name off disrupt.
I think it's important to remember some of the reasons why those situations end up happening too, and is the reason why it becomes more challenging in a number of those situations to be able to pair up multiple students or that sort of thing, because it's not just student placements that we've determined, it's also, and frankly, I don't know exactly the year that the law changed, and I don't say this to be critical of the law because I think it's important for students who are experiencing homelessness and instability in their home. Once a student is identified homeless and they've been our students, even if they're living temporarily somewhere else, we're now transporting them from there. So that's the sort of thing where on the dime, a family situation lands a child in a situation where now suddenly we have a van run to Harrisburg and we're coming back, that we may not have any other student, within 20 miles or 15 miles of that child. So lots of different reasons for those van situations. It is one that's important for us to keep seeing how can we be most efficient, especially with these third-party vendors. But the third-party vendors also know that they've got the market cornered because there aren't enough vans out there, and they know we have to do this. So they're not going to drop their rates anytime soon. So challenging situation for sure.
But as Brian pointed out, I mean, as painful as what the cost can be, in almost every case, we're doing what's right for the student and the family.
Agreed.
Sometimes it's an unfortunate cost of that.
All right. So back to the summary here. Dr. Bitts had introduced, and I think by way of revisiting here as we close out the presentation, you can see total revenue. We were $7.8 million over budget. Certainly, I think it's worth acknowledging, as Dr. Bitts pointed out, 3.4 million of that 7.8 was the debt service fund transfer as we were moving money between our funds. And then the remainder, as we talked about in the presentation, largely attributable to, continued good growth in assessed values, earned income tax, strong performance, doing well with interest income, real estate transfer taxes, all of those things contributing at a local level, plus all of the adequacy monies we've been getting from the state. Then I think on the expense side, Then I think on the expense side, when you look at the 7.7 million, certainly, some things like the transfer out for the capital reserve fund was 1.6 million. The CTC was about, in round numbers, $1.8 million. And then when you start to look at the other negative expense areas, like what happened with medical insurance, it was up 27% and then 17%. What happened with our charter school increases, what happened with some of our special education student service costs, and then ultimately van transportation was an element of some increases there, negative budget variance. Ultimately, it brings us to 2024-25 actual of $2.3 million. And then at the bottom there, just called out again some of the exceptional items that we're running through 24-25 that was a little unique to 24-25, and that we didn't necessarily expect again in 25-26. So.
If you're okay with us going right to 3.02, skip to that.
Absolutely. 3.02, fund balance commitments, general fund.
So the last slide talks about kind of further discussion, and I think in terms of the agenda, we kind of wanted to honor. There were two pieces to the discussion here tonight. We did combine it in one presentation. Ultimately, it was a discussion with the board about the trends we're seeing in revenue and expense. But the second agenda item is about our general fund balance commitments. And so as the board probably recalls, that's a two-step process. Usually in the spring, as we finalize our budget, we're setting aside categories of fund balance, and we're saying that we intend to commit, but that we won't assign the actual dollars until we finalize the audit and know how we want to distribute our monies amongst those commitments. And so if you think about 24-25 and how we ended the year, we had a $2.3 million deficit, right? That was an actual deficit. And so the question might be, okay, so what do you do about that $2.3 million? Our total fund balance, including unassigned and committed balances, is $19.6 million. So when you subtract off that 2.3, that still leaves us fund balance of $17.2 million. I like to kind of acknowledge fund balance. It's important for a number of reasons. I think unassigned is just a contingency, right? And then we have committed categories that you see in the table below, everything from non-spendable all the way down to technology. Those committed balances are generally areas of vulnerability in the general fund, or they're areas that we're saving money and setting it aside in our reserves. And so in this particular case, 24-25, one of the areas of vulnerability was medical insurance, frankly, and the cost of medical care. And so as we had that deficit of 2.3 million, we're largely going to take and kind of draw down some of those monies we set aside for non-spendable and future medical claims. It still leaves a sufficient amount of money left there in the event of future vulnerabilities. But if you add together non-spendable and future medical, it's about 3.7 million that we would still have set aside in our fund balance committed for those purposes. Unassigned will be pretty similar to what it was the prior year at 5.7 million. And then the other commitments that we're recommending at this point include special education and student services at 1.2, capital projects at 5.8, capital equipment at 500,000, and technology at 250. And so you can see then that's probably a little hard to see at the very bottom there. The total of all of those different buckets or categories of fund balance are 17.2 million, which agrees to the top there to say we started the year with fund balance of 19.6. When we draw 2.3 out of it, it leaves us with 17.2. And then based on our recommendation, here's how we intend to distribute it across the different categories.
And can you just remind everybody that the percentage of money that we can have in this fund balance, is it like 8%?
8% for unassigned. And so the way that works is school districts unassigned, I think, is kind of more of like a general contingency, I would say. And you're only allowed a certain percentage, to Ms. Morgan's point, in relation to Act 1 and raising taxes. Now, school districts are able to take the additional step to set aside money for commitments, and those committed dollars don't count toward the calculation of that 8%. Because the state ultimately acknowledges or realizes that, when you look at reserves, you're going to commit them and set them aside for certain purposes. And most school districts, and we are in that category of, generally our philosophy has been, it's those vulnerable areas in the budget that you might see some significant variances. So we set money aside to help you backstop, just in case it's a rainy day. And then also, like capital projects, we set money aside just for future needs, future savings. That's been our philosophy.
So for 24-25, we did we had a 3.9%, and we still lost $2.3 million.
The adjusted Act 1 index for that year was 6.5%. It was the highest that I think I remember. And we decided to go to 3.9.
So would it be fair to say that we could do this 2 more times before we were in real trouble based on spending down unassigned fund balance using to cover our deficit? We have 2 more years of deficit years where before there's some bigger questions to be asked.
Yeah, I think depending how big the deficit is, if it's in that $2 million range, I think you could have 3 more years potentially. I think we got to be careful though and couch that in. That's getting the fund balance pretty low, and the danger is if you run, say you had 3 more years of deficits and the fund balance is pretty low, and then you follow that on with some more bad years, now you're making drastic decisions. And from my perspective, that's part of the delicate balance of, that's part of the reason we have fund balance, so that we don't have to make drastic decisions. You can have a bad year, and we can say, okay, we know we need this. We need to take a little closer look at medical insurance as we head into 25, 26, and ultimately 26, 27. We know we need to look at charter schools and things like that. And sometimes it's not that we can even change the trend, it's just that we need to update our budget assumptions, right? And so medical insurance forever was 8% a year. I think heading into next year, I think we're going to have to true it up and right size it, and it's probably going to be more than 8% adjusted as we head into 26, 27. But ultimately, the fund balance being set aside, to your point, to backstop those deficits so that you're not in a position to make just reactive decisions that would hurt the system. We want to have that buffer so that we can make thoughtful, purposeful decisions about the budget. Ultimately, would love to rebuild that then in future years. If our goal always is to break even, or even if you have a little bit of a surplus, we would come back to the board and have a conversation about, okay, if we had a little bit of surplus in future years, do you rebuild the general fund? Do you put it into the capital reserve fund? All of those things are options, but things that we do as we go.
I think that's what makes the medical situation such a challenging one within the budget, because all prior trends seem to be off at the moment. You know, transportation, we knew we had a new contract. We know how many buses. There's still some unknowns there, but for the most part, we knew what was happening. Even cyber, as frustrating as that is, and as there are some unknowns there, at least we've seen some consistent trends. The healthcare one is the one where we had a trend that we could use for many years, and the last couple have just shown us that it's not working. So what is the new trend going to be? It's kind of hard to tell from the 24 and the 17% increases. Credit to the board. This past year, the Act 1 index was 5%, and the board did make the difficult decision to go to 4.5 to help us try and catch up with some of the medical, and hopefully that will do it for this year.
And I think the other thing, just to build on what Dr. Fitz shared, we'll continue to look at that as we head into future years and say, what do we need to do around these different areas of vulnerability in the budget? What adjustments have to be made? I think as we look at 24, 25 and kind of narrate the story, if you would just take, despite everything else that happened in the budget, if medical would have just stayed and kind of leveled back off like it otherwise would have and came in closer to the budget, we would be talking about a break even or potentially a little bit of a surplus. But because medical increased at the rate it did these last 2 years, it just brought us to this point. Which is why we have rainy day funds and set aside commitments.
Thank you, Mr. Mama.
Thank you so much.
Was item 4 curriculum, item 4.01 new course proposal, introduction to engineering design, 4.02 new course proposal, advanced portfolio.
Yes, so some exciting opportunities for our students here at the high school in both cases, and we'll start with Dr. Einzig, who will be talking to us about the first course, which is the Introduction to Engineering Design.
Everybody. Good evening.
Hello.
Feel like I was just here. Do we get any games tonight or?
There's Slinkies.
No Slinkies tonight, I'm sorry. Actually, last time when we talked about steels, we kind of said the tech and engineering piece, we're working on it. And tonight, the course I want to talk about is part of that work. So Introduction to Engineering Design is an introductory course. And really what it's doing is supporting the commitment that we're making as a district, as a tech and engineering department, as some of our larger endeavors with STEM at large. It's just supporting those expanding experiences for students. We have some engineering opportunities on the books in curriculum, but I would like to see something that is more industry leaning, more modernized, something that is really focused on high level application, real experiences, things that local industries, state, national level in the STEM engineering fields are looking for. And so this introduction course shows students what is engineering, how do we solve problems in an engineering fashion, how are we using computers and some programming to do that, some 3D printing, things along those lines. And the idea is to take them through that process, to give them some initial skills wherever they are coming into this introductory course, and then leaning into solving legitimate problems through various projects. We have a strong kind of traditional tech side to the tech ed department. And I would like to see kind of an offshoot branch of a really strong engineering component that sits alongside of that. This is not a replacement. It's something I'd like to see moving in parallel. And so you can, I'm assuming you can see the course overview. And so this is really kind of prepping students for things that would come later in terms of robotics, material science, kind of really getting into the real mechanism side of engineering as well. This is something that is aligned to a framework called Project Lead the Way, which if you look at the funding section of the course, there are some costs associated there that we've budgeted for. We have a lot of what we would need to run this already with the new facility, with the equipment that we have, with the software that we already subscribe to. But there are some training costs that go along with this because this is using a framework that connects to what's really on the cutting edge in the industry. So.
Does that mean that we're purchasing their curriculum and we're going to implement? Is it that?
So they provide a curriculum framework, and yes, it's a curriculum, but I like to see it more as a framework, like I've been saying. There is still a lot of us that goes into that and how we deliver that to students. And so it fits within the Steele standards in a wonderful fashion. And it also fits into what we expect our teachers to be doing within the curriculum assessment and instruction system. It's a good question.
So that's the annual fee?
There is a subscription fee to access their resources, yes.
To access their what?
Resources. Yeah.
Which would be that curriculum?
Yeah, yeah.
And then that whole program, will that be helpful or useful when we're looking back all the way to elementary and all the changes with STEM moving forward? Would be relying on that same, what is it?
Yeah,
framework?
Yeah, I think what we're just starting to look at with the shifts in the K-5 offering, especially that 4-5 course, is a feeder into exactly this kind of thing.
And this will be able to help us at those levels too. Does this Project Lead the Way also have elementary curriculum, I guess is what I'm asking?
It kind of can lean down into middle school, but there isn't a K-5.
But what you're seeing in the future for STEM at the elementary will lead into this very well.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. That's one.
I'm excited about the new course. I'm curious, why not revamp the existing course and why create these perhaps dual tracks or different tracks?
Sure. So this will play a role in replacing the existing engineering that we're offering. It's not going to replace some of the traditional wood or metal type courses, right? So my hope is that this is one of several things that we're adding in this pipeline to get to some really advanced experiences. And that's where you have that kind of duality. We actually envision moments where maybe a traditional class is actually being delivered alongside one of the engineering courses and we're sharing the space. Assuming you've been at the high school to see some of the changes, especially in the tech ed area and up in the 400 wing of the new addition. And a lot of what's going on in the foyer and the hallway area and some of the alcoves is designed for that exact thing, that we're running kind of concurrent experiences. They might be aimed in different directions, but they're using equipment that's the same. They're bumping shoulders with each other and seeing what this group is working on over here versus another. And so I think just all of those ideas I get really excited about because we have that space and this is how we step into using it more efficiently and maybe in a more robust fashion.
And you were able on one of your site visits at a neighboring school were able to even see that very thing in action.
Yes. Yeah, we did a site visit at Cumberland Valley. They've been actually utilizing this framework for 13 years. And it has taken time. It was a slow build for them. But when we were there, we saw a robotics and advanced robotics course running alongside a traditional materials course in the shops. One teacher handling both experiences at the same time. That also speaks to some of the staffing things, that's on a lot of our minds, and we know the challenge of bringing in teachers, especially into this certification area. And I think that could really help in there as well.
Even a 6-day cycle class like this, you saying this is going to be provided by existing staff, I get it now more so than I did just on the paper. So thank you.
But we also wanted to be transparent that there will probably be an ask for a teacher, not specifically related to this course. That's why it's worded that way in the implementations.
So
That say no.
Teacher could teach it?
What's that?
A tech ed teacher could teach it?
No, they can. No. So we can offer this course next year with our current tech ed teachers that we currently have. But there will be an ask for an additional teacher, but that's really not related to our offering of this course.
Yeah, the new teacher, this does not hinge on having a new teacher, but I think adding things like this speaks to where there is interest and need, and interest from students wanting to take more courses in this vein, and that's what leads to that future ask of another teacher.
Questions?
Awesome.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, thank you, Dave.
Not a class for me.
Course proposal, advanced portfolio.
Yes, so invite up 2 more teachers here with us, 2 of our art all-stars. Mrs. Connell and Mrs. Close will be sharing with us a little bit about the advanced portfolio practice.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I was here last November to talk to you about Broad Street. So maybe it'll be a new tradition. I learned a lot about budget, by the way. And seeing those big numbers makes me feel a little more comfortable about the asks I have coming.
Well, good negotiating.
That's right. We're gonna see. Yeah, I got to talk to you last year about the awesome things happening at the elementary level with our choice focused program. And now I'm here in a different capacity as one of the department coordinators to talk about the high school. Here where, my little guys will eventually end up. We are looking at adding the advanced portfolio class as kind of a culmination and a celebration for our eldest artists. So current students in the high school start in the intro to art class, which combines 2D and 3D elements, and really, I would say to my younger students, is kind of a buffet where they get to pick and choose and sample a lot of different things to find out what they love, at which point they then get to choose a 2D or a 3D track, going into drawing and painting or into sculpture. 1, then 2, and currently that's it. And so in adding the advanced portfolio class, it would give them a chance to bring the 2D and 3D students together, where they can deepen their understanding and their learning. Taught not by me, I'm in plenty of buildings already, but by Ms. Close. So she can answer any questions you have, unless you want to know how to teach, color theory to 6-year-olds, then I'm your girl, but otherwise.
Yeah, if you want to dive in a little bit more, essentially with this course, we want to give students more opportunities, kind of in the same vein as our tech ed siblings. We want that real world application, and in this setting, that's kind of the end goal. So students are going through, again, this idea of aesthetics, really understanding how do we make successful works of art? How can we talk about successful works of art? How can we help each other? There's a lot of really cool, unique opportunities for collaboration at this kind of level. At this point, students are kind of in that bubble of either, yes, I like to draw and paint, I'm in that 2D sphere, or I'm really hands-on in that sculptural aspect. And this gives them an opportunity to kind of inspire one another and work towards these larger goals. So as you see in these course outlines, one of the focuses of portfolio building, hence the title, Advanced Portfolio. This serves for the potential for upper education. So if students are looking to go to college for art, they have to provide a portfolio. We look at a lot of different expectations on what those portfolios require. And right now, a lot of our students aren't quite getting that next level because they don't have that next level just yet. So this would help them build. We build in that structure to help them put together that portfolio and be able to have that constant feedback by educators and their peers. We also kind of work in some kind of opportunities for students to think outside the box. So really pushing what is art to them. How do we make things that fill our art voices? A lot of this is driven not necessarily by medium, so you're not a unit on watercolor. You're going to see a unit on understanding art in an unconventional lens. The idea is here that they come with the concepts, and then we figure out the mediums that kind of push those ideas. That there isn't really a right or wrong way to do that. We're gonna figure it out together. And that's going to look different depending on the artists that are in the room. Continuing on, it is, the potential that they don't go off to art school, but I still want them to have that ability to understand, what could you do? And the culminating project for this, their sort of cornerstone would be curating their own gallery. So we're going to look at professional preparation. So whether it be for themselves someday or for museum opportunities, gallery opportunities, we will be looking at how to actually professionally prepare their work, all of the stuff that goes into that, hanging things, how do you contact a gallery, how do we get our work out into the world, and that would be kind of that culminating project for them. So they would be then curating, organizing, and then displaying their artwork that they are creating for the class. So yeah, that is our hopes. Did you see the cost?
Yeah, I saw that. No additional.
For the low cost.
That's right.
So my senior year in high school, I had an independent art class that was, probably only one or two of us in that class. That is pretty much, we've gone up through all the classes. Are these students going to be working more independently?
Yeah, that is the hope. They'll be developing like their own portfolio. You'll see with that unit 2, that's something that's happening at the underlying sort of process. But we do a lot of critiques and peer feedback. So yes, they'll be working independently, but there's also that opportunity for collaboration. I think within some of these projects, it could open up the door to working with a team. In our sculpture course, there is a teamwork activity where they're kind of focusing on installation work, where they have to work together. So they'll have some of that understanding on collaboration built in through those understructures. So
in my basement, I have many portfolios from my career, but today most things are digital. So are you preparing them to create a website, digital portfolio?
Yeah. So we do that already in all of the under years that come up. So our students are in the process of documenting everything that they've created. So every time they turn in something, they have to digitally document as well as physically turn those things in hopes that they practice. If I am applying to a gallery someday, I have to have high quality images of my work. So yes, website building as well as that professional aspect would be part of that, is taking high quality images of all of your works for whatever that may be.
They'll need that.
You talk about preparing, obviously, for gallery. Is there an opportunity to have a show or a space or anything like that at the end of the week for the entire class?
Yeah, definitely. That's what they'll be curating. So when I was in high school and my senior year in art class, we had to go out into our community and find local galleries that would serve us. And I would love to have them do that as well. Knowing that we do have beautiful spaces at the high school as well, we need to lean back onto those, but we also have a lot of wonderful community spaces too. I know, students who have gone through the art program whose parents own a gallery right in town. So there are tons of spaces that would give them the practice of going out and kind of figuring that out on their own and how that process works.
You mentioned trying to develop this to help students get into art school, develop all these techniques. Do we have we seen students who missed opportunities to get into? We haven't had an offering like this.
It's hard to say. I'm only year 5 at this district, so I don't know the lengths of that. But I think more so the kind of not necessarily the under preparation, but it comes as a surprise of, oh, this is how many pieces I actually have to have, and we're not looking at that until kind of later down the line. This would build that in, so it's not an afterthought and more of a prepared situation for them. I think one of the bigger things is just, as I've been looking through the past couple years, and even when I was in college not that long ago, looking at building art portfolios, the expectations are a little bit more intense. So, you know, just kind of giving them more, not fluff, but giving them more opportunities to build a solid portfolio. I don't know that it's necessarily opportunities lost, but just more, creating more preparation for them now.
It seems like this provides more structure towards that goal, whereas before we probably had to like leave it and suddenly do it on their own.
Yeah.
In order to, put that.
And different art schools have different levels of requirements for your portfolios. So, you know, maybe giving them an opportunity to grow their portfolio differently or expand it gives them that opportunity to look at a MICA or another major art school. Not that there's anything wrong with the other art schools, but it just gives them that other opportunity to go out there and maybe stretch for some of those colleges or art schools that they wouldn't go out, they didn't feel like they were capable of doing it previously.
I love the personalized nature of this. Like, I think it echoes so much of what we're doing at the elementary, where I love where it says that the concepts drive the product. And we talk so much about the child as being the product, like in elementary school. Like, they might become this thing that doesn't really look like anything to anybody who's looking at it, but the product is on the inside. And as our students get older, obviously, you know, we're surrounded by aesthetics, we're surrounded by products all the time. And so giving them the opportunity to use these concepts that are important to them and giving them the autonomy to then come up with these products, both inward and outward, I think is really, really special. And I think it aligns really nicely with our curriculum, K-12.
What are the other, like, high level, what are the other, like, 12th grade classes that you take that are, like, part of this kind of capstone? Or are there others that are similar to this? I'm curious, I don't have it all in front.
So what you see on the paper in terms of, we just have the intro level, and anybody can take that. It's kind of just like that access point. And then you just have the drawing and painting 1, 2, spectrum 1 and 2, and then this would be kind of the only capstone course. But that's sort of, these are only the courses that are offered at the high school.
It really is the missing piece in kind of this somewhat linear journey, and they can take both tracks. They can do drawing and painting 1, and they can also go into the 3D track as well. But everybody would end up then here for those who want to pursue. So it's a missing piece, really.
That's helpful. How many students do you think will be in this? Like, what's the estimate of what we will get?
It's very hard to say. We're still, last year was the first year of implementing our new curriculum, so the numbers are still shaking out. This spring will be the first time that we're offering the second level of those courses, which is why the urgency for this for next year was students are going to tap out after this year, and then we'll have a bunch of students who are taking these second levels, and then they won't have another course to take their senior year. Some of them, their junior year, who are kind of going through the track fast. So yeah, we just kind of gotta get that.
Good question. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lastly, we'll move on to item 7, policy 7.01, first reading of revised board policy 210, use of medications. 7.02, first reading of revised board policy 222, tobacco and vaping products. 7.03, first reading of revised board policy 323, tobacco and vaping products. Dr. Bowman.
Yes, sir. Luckily, get me for all 3 tonight. 210 was brought to us by Mrs. Bridges, but it does deal with use of medications. The updated changes you'll see reflect things such as new definitions, talking about the delegation of responsibilities, but with the student, the parent, and also school personnel. And then also not only the collection and storage of that medicine, but also then the administration of that in different settings, including the last section, which is probably the the most detailed, which talks about the administration of medicines during field trips and how that can play out in the several different scenarios. And it also outlines, I think, even the information that will be required of the parents and the students to provide to the school to make sure that they are eligible to have medication administered to them in those various settings.
Is it wonderful?
No, I was gonna say, any
Oh,
questions?
sorry. Is this really a lot different? When I read through it, I felt like it's following what I thought was in place for quite some time. It's just rewording and rewriting.
It's not, I would say, Mrs. Up, that it's not drastically different, but in her collaboration with our nurses, they felt that the PSB language was appropriate, and they decided to go that route.
It made sense when I read through it.
Yeah.
And then you want this moved forward to the December 9th meeting for a second reading.
That would be ideal.
I don't know. 7.02.
All right. These two are really combined, if you will. 222 and 323, though in different series, both speak to tobacco products, if you will. And really the only changes you read through is pretty minimal. But when the policies were originally written, the product Juul was the brand, like it was the vaping product. And over time, as you know, I'm sure, that has expanded tremendously. So there are a variety of products now that are involved in vaping. This policy accommodates for that and just kind of redefines the vaping products as tobacco products.
So essentially, they're one and the same under the policy now.
Yeah.
Regardless of brand name.
Correct.
Questions? And then these two also will move forward for the December 9th second reading. And vote.
Hey, John, before you adjourn, I won't be, the next time when we talk about you as a board director, and so I wanted to just share that I've been really fortunate to work with you over the last 8 years, and really appreciative of all the mentorship you provided the entire board and the calming influence, and yet also an opportunity for all of us, mostly me, to speak most of the time at these board meetings, but for everyone to get their opinion heard before we deliberate on, or while we're deliberating on things. I think that was a real hallmark of your terms here as board president, among other things. But just wanted to say, great work, and good luck in the next chapter.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
As you say, as you say, law.
Yeah.
Literally.
Drive a van into the sunset.
No, no.
Yeah.
I have a big
That
vote
van's
for
Carl
that.
Island.
And with that, the work session is adjourned.